There is a Krabby Patty that has been sitting under the grill at the Krusty Krab long enough to turn green and grow a little fur, and when SpongeBob reaches down to throw it away, his boss stops him cold, because that ruined patty is still worth about 52 cents, and 52 cents is not something Eugene Krabs will ever willingly let go of. So he eats it himself, to prove it is fine, and it very nearly kills him. That is the man we are spending tonight with. A crab who loves money so completely that he will trade his own health, his own employees, his daughter's birthday, and on more than one occasion his actual soul, just to hold on to a little bit more of it. Almost every strange, dark, and funny corner of who he is grows out of that single obsession, and tonight we are going through all of it, slowly, from the beginning. So get comfortable, turn the lights down low, and if you have not subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these. Let us start with the simplest possible question, which is who he actually is, because the answer is more ordinary than the legend around him suggests. His full name is Eugene Harold Krabs, and he is a red crab who owns and runs a fast food restaurant called the Krusty Krab in the underwater town of Bikini Bottom. He has 2 employees, a fry cook named SpongeBob and a cashier named Squidward, and those 2 are the only staff the place has ever really had. He lives in a hollow anchor with his teenage daughter Pearl. He guards a secret burger recipe. He courts the local boating teacher. He feuds endlessly with a tiny neighbor across the road, and he is cheap in a way that has become the single most famous thing about him. That is the whole shape of the character on paper. And yet the reason we can spend 3 quiet hours on him is that almost none of that greed was supposed to be there at all. Here is the fact that reframes everything else, and I think it is the right place to begin, because it changes how you hear every scene that follows. The greed was invented when Stephen Hillenburg, the marine biologist who created SpongeBob, sat down to design Mr. Krabs. He did not base him on a miser. He based him on a real person, his own former manager at a seafood restaurant where Hillenburg worked as a young man. That manager was red-headed, muscular, a former army cook, and he spoke with a heavy Maine accent that came out sounding a little like a pirate. The red shell you see on screen is standing in for that man's red hair. The gruff, salty, sea captain voice is a memory of the way he talked. But by every account Hillenburg gave, that real manager was not obsessed with money. The stinginess, the counting, the crying over pennies, the whole engine of this video was something Hillenburg added on purpose, later, because he felt the character needed a stronger personality and a clear flaw to push against SpongeBob's innocence. So the trait we are here to examine, the one that defines him more than his shape or his voice or his family, is a writer's decision. It was grafted onto an otherwise fairly normal restaurant boss. I find that genuinely strange to hold in your head, because the greed feels so essential now, so baked into the bone of the character, that it is hard to imagine a version of him without it. But there was one, and it existed first. The man who gives Mr. Krabs his voice is the actor Clancy Brown, and he has been doing it since the very first episode in 1999, which means he has now voiced this crab for more than a quarter of a century without stopping. If you know Clancy Brown from anywhere else, it is probably from roles that could not be further from a cartoon crustacean. He played the brutal prison guard Captain Hadley in The Shawshank Redemption. He played the immortal villain in Highlander. He has voiced Lex Luthor in a long run of DC animated projects. He is a big, imposing, serious actor, and he ended up attached, apparently for life, to a miserly crab at the bottom of the ocean. He told the New York Post back in 2015 that there is no corollary in his live-action work to playing this part, nothing else in his career that scratches the same itch, and that he expects to keep doing it, in his words, until the end of time. What is interesting, and this cuts against the reputation the character has picked up, is that Brown did not start out as some loose improviser throwing out ad-libs. He told the AV Club, in an interview from April of 2018, that early on he actually pushed back against Hillenburg. He wanted to be directed. He asked, in effect, "Steve, you are the director, right?" Because he wanted clear guidance rather than being handed the freedom to invent. By his account, Hillenburg spent most of that first season tiptoeing around him, feeling out how much to steer and how much to let the actor find it. That is not the story you would expect from the man behind so many of the show's biggest laughs. And it undercuts a popular myth about the character too. People assume that Mr. Krabs' distinctive laugh, that wheezing, nasal, up and down cackle, is an ad-lib, a bit of Clancy Brown magic. It is not. The laugh is written into the script. spelled out phonetically, and Brown simply reads it off the page the way it is typed. The genuine improvisation on this show tends to happen later, on what the cast calls a third pass, a sort of crazy take they record after 2 straight scripted ones, and that looser pass is usually led by Tom Kenny, the voice of SpongeBob, rather than by Brown. There is one more thing Clancy Brown has said, across several interviews, that I keep coming back to, because it is the closest thing we have to a defense of the character from the inside. Brown thinks Mr. Krabs is misunderstood, and he means misunderstood even by the people writing him. He has praised Doug Lawrence, who voices Plankton and also writes for the show, for writing Krabs comically, with a light touch. But he has also said that other writers sometimes write Krabs as, in his words, kind of a jerk, and that he pushes back against that when he can. On the NPR program Fresh Air, in an interview from March of 2023, Brown put it a different way. He called the money obsession a dumb obsession with capitalism, and he made the point that Krabs does not even really know why he is fixated on money. He described the famous money crying as sincere but performative, and he pointed out something you can actually watch happen in episode after episode, which is that the instant cash starts flowing in, Krabs stops crying. The grief evaporates the second the register fills. Read Brown's way, the greed is not evil. It is a kind of compulsive, unexamined stupidity, a habit the Krab cannot explain even to himself, and that reading is going to matter later when we get to the episodes where the writers pushed him towards something much colder. Even the way Mr. Krabs walks is a solved problem rather than an accident. Krabs move sideways, on a lot of legs, and animating a cartoon crab who walks like a person while still reading as a crab is genuinely awkward. The solution came from a storyboard artist named Eric Wiese, who designed a 4-frame cycle that uses a kind of motion blur, a multi-blur, so that his legs scuttle in a way that looks fast and crab-like without looking wrong. Wiese called it the best solution to making him walk like a crab, and Hillenburg approved it after seeing a simple pencil test of the idea. It is the sort of thing you never notice while it is working, and that invisibility is the whole measure of the job being done well. And then there is his house, which tells you something quiet about the design thinking. Mr. Krabs lives inside a hollow anchor, a big curved iron anchor sitting on the sea floor with rooms hollowed out inside it. That was not in the earliest plans. In Hillenburg's original 1997 pitch, the Krusty Krab itself was meant to be Krabs and Pearl's home, the restaurant and the house being the same building. The anchor house was added after the first season was already in production, and design write-ups around the show note that an anchor was a deliberate choice, because an anchor reads as heavy, grounded, unmovable, something that holds a ship in place and refuses to drift. For a character defined by clinging to what he has, by refusing to let a single coin float away from him, a home shaped like the one object whose entire job is to not let go, feels almost too fitting. He does not live in a treasure chest. He lives in the thing that keeps a ship from moving. If you want to understand a hoarder, you look at what he keeps, not what he spends. And Mr. Krabs keeps 2 things above all others. 2 small coins that he treats less like money and more like relics from a religion. The first is his first dollar, the very first dollar the Krusty Krab ever earned, framed and hung on the wall of his office. The second is his first dime, which is somehow even more sacred to him, a battered little coin he has carried since long before the restaurant existed. These are not investments. He would never spend them. They are worth exactly $1 and 1 dime, and they are the 2 most valuable objects he owns, and the show is very deliberate about the difference between those 2 kinds of value. The dollar gets its own episode, more or less, in a Season 3 story called Wet Painters. The setup is small and domestic. Krabs is going away for a while, and he wants his living room repainted, so he hands the job to SpongeBob and Patrick, and because he does not trust them, he lays down a threat. The paint, he tells them, is permanent, and if a single drop of it lands anywhere other than the walls, he will cut off their behinds. So they paint in a state of pure terror, moving in slow motion, holding their breath, and of course, the inevitable happens. A tiny bubble of paint drifts loose, floats across the room, and lands directly on the framed first dollar, his most prized possession in the entire world. The rest of the episode is the 2 of them spiraling into panic, trying everything to clean it, convinced they are about to be maimed. And then Krabs comes home, sees the dollar, and reveals the twist. which is that saliva dissolves this paint completely. He licks the dollar clean. It was never permanent. The whole threat was a joke he was playing on them, or at least a bluff, and the dollar is fine. What lingers, though, is the reaction before the twist. The way the possibility of harm to that one framed bill is treated by everyone involved as an unthinkable catastrophe. It is played for laughs, but the emotional logic underneath is real. To Krabs, that dollar is not paper. It is the first proof that his whole life's idea actually worked. There is a small detail about how he relates to that dollar that I love, and it runs through several episodes as a recurring gag. Mr. Krabs identifies his money by smell. He does not check the frame. He does not read the serial number. He sniffs the first dollar to know that it is his. His sense of smell for money is treated as almost supernatural. In the episode Krusty Love, his nose is sharp enough to detect that the register is short by a single penny, 1 cent missing out of a full day's take, purely by smell. The greed is not just in his hands or his eyes. It is wired into his most animal sense, the one we associate with hunger, and he can smell a missing coin the way a shark smells a drop of blood. The dime is a different and stranger story, and it comes with a piece of real-world design history that is one of the 5 things I most wanted to get to tonight, so let us slow down for it. The dime gets its own episode in Season 3 as well, one called Can You Spare a Dime? And the plot is genuinely bleak when you lay it out plainly. Krabs' first dime goes missing, and rather than consider any innocent explanation, he immediately decides that Squidward, who works the register, must have stolen it. He accuses him. Squidward, insulted to his core, quits on the spot, and because Squidward has just walked out of the only job he has, his life comes apart. He ends up homeless, living in a cardboard box, and eventually crashing at SpongeBob's house, slowly losing his mind as a houseguest who will not leave. All of this total collapse of a man's living situation, unspools from a single missing 10-cent coin. And then Krabs finds the dime. It was in his own pocket the whole time. Squidward never touched it. Krabs destroyed an employee's life, drove him to homelessness, over a coin that had never actually left his own body. That is the pattern in its purest form, and the show is not shy about how ugly it is. There is a cut piece of that episode worth mentioning, because it tells you how far the animators were willing to go before the network pulled them back. At one point in Can You Spare a Dime, SpongeBob ends up choking Mr. Krabs, and in the version that was originally boarded, that shot kept going until Krabs' eyes turned bloodshot red from the strangling. It was trimmed for being too violent for the slot. So the finished episode is already dark, a man ruined over a dime, and the version that existed a step earlier was darker still, dark enough that someone decided the bloodshot eyes had to go. Now, the dime itself. In the show, that first dime is a keepsake he sometimes calls dimey, and here is the thing almost nobody watching would ever guess. The design of that treasured coin is modeled on a real currency from the real world, the stone money of the island of Yap, in Micronesia. These are called rye stones, and they are enormous carved discs of limestone, some of them taller than a person, with a hole in the center, used for centuries by the Yapese as genuine money. And the reason this is such an unbelievably perfect match for Mr. Krabs is not just the shape, it is how the money worked. Rye stones were often far too heavy to move, so when one changed hands, when it was used to pay for something, the stone itself physically stayed exactly where it was. It did not go anywhere. What changed was the shared understanding of who owned it. The community simply agreed and remembered that this particular stone now belonged to someone new. Ownership was a story people held in their heads, and the stone sat still through all of it. Even more strangely, a rye stone's value grew with its history, with the remembered tale of how it was quarried and shipped and who had held it. A famous, storied stone was worth more than a plain one, for reasons that were entirely about memory and narrative rather than the rock. Sit with how well that maps onto Mr. Krabs. Here is a character whose single most treasured object is one immovable coin. He does not spend it. He does not invest it. Its worth to him has nothing to do with its face value of 10 cents, and everything to do with its history, the story of it being his first, the memory of where it came from. He worships a coin that does not move, and whose value lives entirely in remembered history, and the designers drew it after a real human currency that worked in precisely that way. There is even a strange footnote to the rye stone story. that rhymes with Krabs' whole worldview. In 1874, a trader named David O'Keefe figured out he could ship these giant stones in cheaply, using modern tools. And by flooding the island with easy rye stones, he caused runaway inflation, cheapening the very thing that had held value precisely because it was hard to get. Scarcity was the whole point, and once scarcity died, so did the worth. Mr. Krabs, a creature built out of scarcity, out of a poor childhood where every coin was survival, would have understood that collapse in his bones. So you have these two objects, the dollar and the dime, and together they form the emotional core of the character, underneath all the scheming. Everything else he does, every con and every cruel little charge and every soul he sells, radiates out from a man who once had nothing and who now keeps 2 small coins as proof that nothing is behind him. The comedy of his greed is loud. The reason for it is very quiet, and it is sitting in a picture frame and in his pocket the whole time. Now we can go back to that moldy patty from the very start of the night, because the episode it comes from, a Season 3 story called Again Krabs, is the single clearest picture the show ever paints of where his greed actually leads, and it takes him further than almost any other half hour. The setup is exactly what I described. There is a Krabby Patty rotting under the grill, gone green and furry, and SpongeBob wants to throw it out. Krabs stops him, because tossing it would mean losing the roughly 52 cents that Patty is worth. He decides to sell it. When that fails, he decides to eat it himself, to prove there is nothing wrong with it, and the rotten patty poisons him so badly that he collapses and ends up in the hospital, hovering near death. And it is at that threshold, at the edge of dying, that the Flying Dutchman arrives. The Dutchman is the show's resident ghost pirate, a green, glowing specter who deals in souls, and he has come to collect Eugene Krabs. The reason he has come is spelled out clearly. Krabs is cheap, and the Dutchman intends to take his soul down to Davy Jones's locker, which the show frames as the place where cheap, stingy people end up. I want to be careful with the language here, because this is a spot where fans and wikis run ahead of what the show actually says. The Dutchman describes the locker as the resting place of all cheap people, an underworld reserved for misers, and a great many summaries online will flatly call it the show's version of hell. But no character in the episode ever says the word hell out loud. And part of the joke is that Davy Jones's locker, when the show finally shows it to you elsewhere, is depicted as a literal gym locker stuffed with smelly old socks. So it is the underworld and it is a punchline at the same time, which is very much the register this show likes to sit in. Krabs, faced with eternity in a sock drawer for the sin of being a tightwad, makes a bargain. He gets to return to life on the condition that he can prove he is not really cheap, that he can put someone else ahead of his money. And the heartbreaking, very on-brand thing is that when the test comes, he fails it. Given a direct choice between his money and SpongeBob's life, he hesitates. He reaches for the money, and the Dutchman takes SpongeBob instead. What saves the day is not a change of heart. It is Squidward, of all people, shaming Krabs for what he has done, and then a final absurd reversal in which the Dutchman gives SpongeBob back, not out of mercy, but because SpongeBob turned out to be too relentlessly annoying to keep around in the afterlife. So the episode lets Krabs off the hook with a joke, but it does not let him off the hook morally. When the stakes were real, when it was a coin against a friend's soul, he went for the coin. That is the darkest the early, warmer version of the character ever gets, and it is worth remembering when people insist the classic seasons never made him cruel. This episode also happens to be a beautiful little window into how these stories change when they cross a border, and it connects to a piece of dub trivia that is one of my favorite facts in this entire story. The exact value of Krabs' soul, that number underneath the whole plot, is not the same in every country. In the American version, the moldy patty, and by extension the price on his cheapness, is pegged at 62 cents. In the Dutch dub, that same soul is repriced all the way down to just 6 cents. Somewhere in translation, a Dutch writer looked at Eugene Krabs and decided his soul was worth barely a tenth of what the Americans thought, which is a joke inside a joke if you enjoy that sort of thing. But it is the German dub that does something wonderful with this episode, and it is one of the 5 things I most wanted to make sure we got to tonight. When Krabs comes back from the brink and needs a fake identity for part of the plot, the German version does not just translate his alias. It renames him Benjamin Blümchen. Now, Benjamin Blümchen is not a random name. He is a hugely famous German cartoon character, a talking elephant, beloved by generations of German children. And the reason this particular joke lands the way it does is that the German actor who dubs Mr. Krabs, a man named Jürgen Kluckert, also happens to be the voice of Benjamin Blümchen the elephant. So, at the moment Krabs adopts the alias, Kluckert slips out of his crab voice and into his elephant voice, right there in the scene, and German viewers hear their beloved childhood elephant come out of the mouth of this dying, soul-selling crab. It is a piece of localization so specific, so dependent on one actor voicing two icons, that it could never travel anywhere else. American audiences have no equivalent and never will. And as a small bonus, this episode aired in Germany roughly 2 weeks before it aired in the United States, so German kids technically got Born Again Krabs first. There is a sadder coda to attach to that fact, because it turns out both of Mr. Krabs' longest-serving foreign voices died within about 2 months of each other in 2023. Jürgen Kluckert, the German voice, that same actor who could turn Krabs into an elephant mid-scene, and who was also the standard German dub voice of Morgan Freeman and Chuck Norris, passed away in August of that year. And the beloved Latin American Spanish voice of the character, known to millions of viewers as Don Cangrejo, the Venezuelan actor Luis Perez Pons, died that October. Two men on opposite sides of the world who had each spent decades being the voice of the same greedy crab, gone within weeks of one another. It is the kind of thing you only notice when you go looking at the machinery behind a character. All these different people in different languages keeping the same little crab alive, and it makes the whole enterprise feel much more human than a cartoon about a burger restaurant has any right to. While we are down here with the Flying Dutchman and Davy Jones's locker, it is worth pausing on the fact that both of those are real, in the sense that both are genuine old pieces of sailors' language that long predate this show. Davy Jones' locker is an 18th century sailor's term for the bottom of the sea considered as a grave, a place where drowned sailors and sunken ships go. It shows up in print as early as 1726, and it was popularized by the novelist Tobias Smollett in his book The Adventures of Peregrine Pickle in 1751. Nobody is entirely sure who Davy Jones originally was. One leading theory ties the name to the biblical Jonah, the sailor who brought bad luck onto his ship and was thrown overboard, with Jones being a corruption of Jonah into sailor slang for a bringer of misfortune. Another theory points to a real London pub owner named Jones, who supposedly drugged and pressed his drinking customers into service, selling them off to ships. Either way, the show reached back into 300-year-old maritime folklore for the specific fate it threatens crabs with, which is a lovely bit of texture for a character whose whole look is pirate and sea captain. The Flying Dutchman is real folklore too, in the same way. The legend of a ghost ship doomed to sail forever, never able to make port, goes back to the 17th century and is rooted in the world of the Dutch East India Company, the great trading empire that ran ships between Europe and Asia. There are a couple of real captains sometimes named as the seed of the story. One is Bernard Fokke, a Dutch captain famous for making the run from Holland to Java so impossibly fast that people whispered he must have made a deal with the devil to do it. Another is a captain named Hendrik van der Decken, whose company ship is said to have vanished around 1641. So when this cartoon crab bargains with a glowing green pirate over the price of his soul, he is doing it inside a tradition of sea ghosts and cursed captains that real sailors feared, centuries before anyone drew a sponge. If the moldy patty shows you what his greed does to his health, another Season 3 episode, called Clams, shows you what it does to his sense of proportion, which is to say it destroys it completely. The episode begins on a happy note, or what passes for happy in the Krabs household. A customer hands over a single dollar bill, and that bill happens to be the 1 millionth dollar the Krusty Krab has ever taken in. Krabs is overjoyed. He closes the restaurant, he frames the moment, he decides to celebrate this milestone by taking SpongeBob and Squidward out on a little boat trip. And here is where the whole thing tips over, because he brings the actual 1 millionth dollar with him, out onto the open water, the way you might bring a newborn. SpongeBob, trying to be helpful, casts a fishing line, and the line catches the dollar and flicks it out over the sea, where a giant clam with big blue lips snaps it out of the air and swallows it. What follows is a straight parody of the film Jaws, except the monster being hunted is a clam, and the obsessed captain is a crab who has lost a single dollar bill. Krabs becomes Captain Ahab. He refuses to go home. He drives his 2 employees to the edge of exhaustion and danger, out on the water hunting this clam, because the dollar inside it is not $1 to him, it is the 1,000,000th dollar, a number with a weight that has nothing to do with its spending power. And the episode builds to a moment that Clancy Brown himself has singled out, in interviews, as one of his favorite gags in the whole series. In the climax, to get the dollar back, Krabs offers to trade the clam his entire body, every part of it. He negotiates himself down, piece by piece, until he is offering everything he has, except his head and his left claw. He is willing to become a head and a single claw, to be barely alive, permanently, in exchange for $1 bill that he was never going to spend anyway. Brown loves that ending, and he loves the very similar ending of another greed episode, One Krabs Trash, where Krabs again ends up reduced to almost nothing by his own scheming. It is worth knowing which parts of this character the actor playing him actually enjoys, because it tells you how he thinks the greed is best used. He does not point to the cruel episodes. He points to the ones where the greed folds back on Krabs himself and leaves him as a head on the seafloor, undone by wanting too much. In the same spirit, Brown has called the treasure map episode Arg, where Krabs goes half-mad chasing buried gold, emblematic of the whole character, and he has singled out the episode Hooky, where SpongeBob gets hooked on the dangerous thrill of riding fishing hooks, as an underrated little parable about addiction. Brown's single favorite line in the entire show, for what it is worth, is not even a greed line. It is Krabs saying, "You are a mystery, SpongeBob," in the episode My Pretty Seahorse. There is a fondness in how he talks about the part that sits a little at odds with how mean the writing sometimes gets, and I think that gap is one of the more interesting things about the character. One Krabs Trash, the episode Brown pairs with Clams, deserves its own walkthrough, because it is greed as a full horror movie in miniature. It starts with Krabs running a yard sale of junk he has fished out of the trash, selling garbage to his neighbors for pennies. SpongeBob buys one item, a novelty hat with cans and a drinking straw attached, the kind of soda drinking hat you would see at a stadium. It is worthless. And then, by pure chance, a pair of wealthy hat collectors reveal that this exact hat is extraordinarily rare, worth as much as $1 million to the right buyer. The moment Krabs hears that number, the yard sale trinket he sold for almost nothing becomes the most important object in the world, and he has to get it back. So he schemes. He tries to buy it back, and when SpongeBob will not sell, because the hat was a gift and means something to him, Krabs escalates into genuine cruelty. He invents a curse. He tells SpongeBob the hat is haunted, that its previous owner died in it, that a ghost will come for him. He stages a whole supernatural terror campaign, complete with rising from a grave, to frighten a loyal, trusting employee into handing over a hat. And in the end, it is all for nothing, because the collectors discover an entire warehouse full of identical hats, thousands of them, which instantly crashes the value to zero. The rare thing was never rare. Krabs terrorized SpongeBob, dug up a fake grave, played dead, all to chase a value that evaporated the moment more of the thing existed. It is the Rhinestone lesson again. Scarcity as the whole source of worth, told as a ghost story. What links Clams and One Krabs Trash, and what makes them a matched pair, in Brown's mind and in mine, is that in both the greed is not really about the money. In Clams, the dollar is worth $1. In One Krabs Trash, the hat turns out to be worth nothing. The actual cash at stake in each is trivial or imaginary. What Krabs is chasing is the idea of the money, the number, the milestone, the rumored fortune, and he will trade his body and his conscience and his employees' trust for an idea. That is the difference between a person who wants money because of what it buys and a person for whom money has become the thing itself, detached from anything it could ever be used for. Krabs is the second kind. He does not want $1 million so he can do $1 million worth of things. He wants to have wanted it, to have gotten it, to hold the number, and a man like that can be ruined by a clam, because the clam took the number, and the number was everything. There is a smaller, quieter episode that makes the same point with almost no plot at all, and it is one of my favorite little illustrations of how far gone he is. In a Season 2 episode called Squid's Day Off, Krabs is briefly away from the restaurant, and the cash register malfunctions and spills coins. Krabs, hearing about money and trouble, cannot stay away. He becomes so consumed with the loose change that he ends up at the sink, washing the coins one by one, as if they were precious and dirty and needed care. And then a single dime slips toward the drain, and in lunging to save it, he loses his arms down the pipes and knocks himself unconscious. It is 30 seconds of story. A grown crab, alone, washing coins in a sink, dismantling himself over a dime rolling toward a drain. There is no scheme, no villain, no stakes. It is just a portrait of the compulsion running with no one watching, and it is somehow one of the purest things the show ever did with him. The greed does not need an audience or a payoff. Left alone in a room with money, he will hurt himself over 10 cents, and no one made him do it. So far, we have mostly watched his greed hurt himself, which is the version of it that is safest to laugh at. But the other half of the story, the half that keeps this from being a purely sympathetic portrait, is what the greed does to the two people who work for him. Because Mr. Krabs does not just save money, he extracts it from the labor of a fry cook and a cashier who are, by any honest reading of the show, some of the most exploited employees in animation. The clearest single expression of this is a Season 2 episode called Squid on Strike, and it is worth laying out in full because the show almost never states his labor philosophy this plainly. The episode opens with Krabs noticing that profits are very slightly down, and rather than accept a small dip, he decides to make up the difference by charging his own employees for things that are not chargeable. He institutes a list of new fees, and the fees are the joke, because each one is more absurd than the last. He bills them for existing. He bills them for breathing. There are charges for talking, for standing, for chewing, for what he calls lollygagging, each with its own price, so that simply being alive and present in the building costs money that comes straight out of their pay. Squidward, finally pushed past his limit, recognizes this for what it is and organizes a strike. He convinces SpongeBob to walk out with him, though SpongeBob barely understands what a strike is and keeps accidentally undermining it out of sheer love for his job. In the chaos, the two of them end up destroying the Krusty Krab, wrecking the building entirely, and Krab's response to the rubble is the darkest punchline in the episode. He does not fire them. He tells them they will have to work for him, in his words, forever, to pay off the cost of the damages. He converts their mistake into unlimited, unpayable debt, eternal labor to settle a bill. That is the fantasy that lives at the bottom of his relationship with his workers, and the episode just says it out loud. The wages themselves are a running joke that the writers keep deliberately inconsistent, always tilted so that Krabs comes out ahead. Sometimes SpongeBob and Squidward receive a tiny paycheck. Sometimes, in the logic of a given gag, they actually owe Mr. Krabs money at the end of a pay period, the accounting twisted so that working a full week leaves them poorer. It is played for laughs, but the through line is that their labor flows almost entirely upward, and the show is consistent that Krabs pays far below anything you could call fair. There is a Season 2 episode, Bossy Boots, that quietly puts a number on the imbalance. In it, Pearl works at the restaurant for the summer and, with SpongeBob's help, redecorates the Krusty Krab into a frilly teen hangout she renames the Cuddly Krab, which is briefly popular but actually loses money. Krabs needs Pearl gone but cannot bear to fire his own daughter, so the plot works itself out, and in the resolution SpongeBob buys the entire contents of the restaurant, every fixture and fitting, to set things right. The cost of that purchase, the show tells us, is a full year of SpongeBob's salary. An entire year of work, spent in a single gesture, and it is treated as a throwaway gag about how devoted and how underpaid he is. Krabs profits even from his fry cook's loyalty, because the loyalty itself is free labor he never has to account for. What makes the exploitation land, rather than just being cartoon meanness, is that SpongeBob genuinely, uncomplicatedly loves his job. He is not a mistreated worker who dreams of escape. He is a worker so happy to be there that his happiness becomes the very thing his boss can exploit for free. Krabs never has to motivate SpongeBob, never has to pay him properly, never has to fear him leaving, because SpongeBob would pay Krabs for the privilege if the accounting ever swung that way, and in Bossy Boots it essentially does. There is something almost tender and almost predatory tangled together in that dynamic, and the show mostly lets it stay tangled rather than resolving it, which is the honest choice. Even the restaurant's own menu is designed around this. There is a small, recurring background gag where the Krusty Krab menu contains customer-friendly promises hidden in unreadable fine print. Promises Krabs never intends anyone to actually collect on. In the episode Pickles, the menu technically guarantees a refund, buried in type too small to read. In a much later episode, the menu's fine print reads that if your food is late, it is free, which is exactly the kind of promise a cheapskate makes, only because he is confident no one will ever be able to enforce it. The generosity is real on paper, and fictional in practice, printed small enough that it costs him nothing. It is a lovely little piece of world building, because it means his stinginess is not just in his behavior, it is baked into the physical documents of his business, waiting in the fine print for a customer sharp enough to catch it. To understand where the restaurant itself came from, and therefore where the whole machine of his greed was built, you have to go to a Season 3 episode that is not really an episode at all in the normal sense. It is called Krusty Krab Training Video, and it is framed as an industrial training film, the kind of instructional video a new employee would be forced to watch on their first day, narrated in that chipper corporate voice, addressed to SpongeBob as the newest hire. It is one of the most inventive things the show ever made, and it is also the source of a good chunk of the restaurant's official backstory. This is where we get the famous acronym that supposedly guides the whole business, POOP, which the video cheerfully explains stands for People Order Our Patties. And this is where we get the origin of the building. According to the training video, the structure that became the Krusty Krab was once a bankrupt retirement home called the Rusty Krab. Krabs acquired the failed building, and he transformed it into his restaurant through the cheapest possible renovation, essentially by painting a K onto the sign so that Rusty became Krusty. The grand origin of Bikini Bottom's most beloved restaurant is a dead nursing home and one letter of paint. The training video also gives us something heavier, tucked into its cheerful format, which is the reason Krabs was in a position to buy a bankrupt building in the first place. It states that before the Krusty Krab, Krabs had served in the military, and that after his service he fell into a deep depression. It is out of that depression, that low and empty stretch of his life, that he found the failed retirement home and poured himself into turning it into a business. Now, the show keeps this vague on purpose, and I want to keep it vague too, because there is a great deal of fan theorizing about exactly which war he fought in, built out of background gags and joke birth years, and none of that is confirmed. What the show does tell us, plainly, is that the Krusty Krab was born out of a veteran's depression, that the restaurant was a way back into the world for a man who had come home from something and sunk. That reframes the greed a little. The place he guards so ferociously, the place whose every penny he counts, is also the thing that pulled him up out of the worst period of his life. He is not only protecting his money when he protects the Krusty Krab, he is protecting the proof that he climbed out. Everything we have talked about so far, the counting and the hoarding and the exploitation, rests on one object, and it is not the first dollar or the first dime. It is the recipe for the Krabby Patty, the secret formula that makes the burger nobody can replicate, and therefore the single thing that makes the Krusty Krab worth anything at all. Guarding his money and guarding that formula are the same act, because the formula is the source of the money. So it is worth spending some time on what the formula actually is, what the show has said about it, and the enormous amount of nonsense that has grown up around it, some of which is far stranger than the fiction. Let us start with a correction, because this is a point people get wrong constantly. The secret formula is not something only Mr. Krabs knows. That is the popular shorthand, the lone genius guarding his one secret, and it is not true even inside the show. SpongeBob knows the combination to the safe where the formula is kept. The formula is treated in more than one episode as a family recipe, known to the wider Krabs family rather than to Eugene alone. And most importantly, the formula has actually been stolen and successfully used, more than once, so it is clearly not locked away beyond all reach. It is closely guarded, obsessively guarded, but it is not his private possession in the way the legend suggests. Where exactly it lives changes from episode to episode too. Usually it is sealed inside a small glass bottle, inside a safe, or a vault in the restaurant. In a couple of episodes there is a running gag that Krabs keeps it hidden under his own mattress. The hiding place is a joke that moves around, not a fixed fact, and it is worth not being too confident about any single version of it. The origin of the recipe is where the show contradicts itself in a way it never bothers to resolve. And honestly, the contradiction is more interesting than either version alone. In a Season 5 episode called Friend or Foe, we are told the Krabby Patty was invented by accident, when a young Eugene Krabs and a young Sheldon Plankton, best friends at the time, bought the space left behind by a failed burger restaurant and started experimenting. In that telling, the winning formula came out of a fight. The two of them argued over the recipe and physically tore it in half, and Plankton was left holding only his portion, which read a pinch of chum, while Krabs kept the half that actually worked. That accidental split is what supposedly created the specific combination that made the Krabby Patty magical, and it is what ended the friendship and started the rivalry. But then, in other episodes, the formula is framed as something much older, an ancestral family recipe stretching back to medieval times, first served by a distant Krabs ancestor, a monarch called King Krabs, in a story set in a kind of underwater Middle Ages. Both of these cannot be true. Either the patty was invented by two kids in a failed burger joint, or it was handed down through a royal family line for centuries. The show has never reconciled them, and it clearly does not intend to. That chum detail from Friend or Foe matters, because it lands right in the middle of the most famous fan theory this show has ever produced. The theory that the secret ingredient in a Krabby Patty is crab meat. The theory is genuinely clever, and I understand why it has such a grip on people. The argument goes like this. The Krusty Krab is shaped like a crab trap, or a lobster trap, a device built specifically to catch and hold crustaceans. Mr. Krabs is a crab, and yet you almost never see other crabs in Bikini Bottom. And there is one line, from a Season 3 episode called Midlife Crustacean, where Krabs takes a bite of a Krabby Patty and muses, "So that is what I taste like." To a fan building a theory, that is a confession. It suggests the patties are made from crab, that Krabs is unknowingly cannibalizing his own kind for profit, and that the whole restaurant is a crab trap in the most literal sense, a machine for turning crabs into cash. The show's producer Vincent Waller has said that Stephen Hillenburg confirmed there is absolutely no meat, no animal product of any kind, in a Krabby Patty. Nickelodeon itself, at one point, publicly stated that they could 100% confirm that Krabby Patties are not made from crabs. So as a matter of the creator's intent, the crab meat theory is dead, and yet I would not go all the way to calling the patty strictly vegetarian either, because as we just saw, chum is part of the on-screen recipe in Friend or Foe, and chum is not a vegetable. So the honest position, the one that respects everything the show and the crew have actually said, is this. The crab meat theory is the most famous SpongeBob fan theory in existence. It is a brilliant piece of amateur detective work, and it is not true. But the patty is not confirmed to be meatless either. The recipe, on screen, includes chum. The truth sits in an uncomfortable middle that satisfies neither the theorists nor the people who want the burger to be wholesome. There is a real-world layer to the secrecy that I find more compelling than the theory, honestly. The formula is guarded inside the show, but it was also guarded outside the show, by the people making it, in almost exactly the same way. Vincent Waller has said that Stephen Hillenburg was the only person who ever saw the complete Krabby Patty formula, that the crew genuinely kept it internal, an inside joke and a real secret at the same time. The most famous fictional recipe in cartoon history was protected by its creators with the same obsessive care that the character on screen uses to protect it, which means life imitated the joke. And this goes all the way back to the beginning. In Hillenburg's original 1996 pitch Bible, the document that laid out the rules of the show before it existed, one of the hard rules was that the Krabby Patty formula must stay secret forever. It sat right alongside other founding guardrails, like the rule that there would be no surface world, and that SpongeBob would never get his boat license. That last one because real sea sponges reproduce asexually, and Hillenburg wanted to keep a strange biological logic under everything. Several of those original rules were quietly broken later, but the rule that the formula stays secret has, more or less, held for the entire run of the show, which is a remarkable bit of discipline for a franchise this size. And then there is the perfect modern coda to all of this, which is one of the 5 facts I most wanted to reach tonight, because it is so silly and so telling at once. In November of 2025, a post went viral, racking up something like 1 million views, claiming to be a genuine leak of the real Krabby Patty secret formula. People shared it breathlessly, and it turned out not to be a leaked cartoon recipe at all. It was an internal Burger King spec sheet, a real corporate recipe document for a product Burger King was actually launching, something they were calling the SpongeBob Krabby Whopper, tied to a real promotional menu that went live in early December of that year. So the great Krabby Patty formula leak of 2025 was a fast food chain's paperwork for a licensed burger, mistaken by the internet for the crown jewel of Bikini Bottom. The best part is that Burger King's own social media account replied to the viral post with, essentially, "What is this? Playing dumb about their own recipe." The most protected secret in the ocean turned out, in its one great modern leak, to be a Whopper variant. There is something perfect about that a man who worships money so completely would have his life's secret finally revealed to the world, and have it be a corporate promotion. There is a whole cluster of episodes where the greed stops being a plot device and becomes something closer to a genuine sickness, a compulsion that overrides sense, safety, and self-preservation, and I want to spend some time in that cluster, because it is where the show is quietly at its most interesting about him. The pattern in all of them is the same. A tiny amount of money, an amount not worth caring about, seizes his entire mind, and the chase for it costs him far more than the money was ever worth. The clearest example is a Season 6 episode called Penny Foolish, and the joke of it is right there in the title. Krabs, out on the sidewalk, sees SpongeBob bend down and pick something up off the ground, and he becomes utterly convinced that what SpongeBob found was a penny. 1 cent. From that instant, the penny consumes him. He cannot think about anything else. He starts hallucinating pennies everywhere, seeing the glint of copper in every corner of his vision, and he begins scheming, elaborately, obsessively, to get this 1 cent away from his fry cook. He follows him, he plots, he loses sleep, he pours days of energy into acquiring a single penny. And the twist at the end is the perfect punishment for the whole enterprise, because what SpongeBob actually picked up was not a penny at all. It was a piece of chewed gum, for a gum collection, a wad of the stuff. Krabs has spent the entire episode losing his mind over a coin that never existed. And there is a final, almost cruel little grace note, because it is revealed that hidden inside that wad of gum is a crumpled $500 bill, a genuine small fortune, which Krabs never notices because he is too busy still digging for the imaginary penny. The episode ends with him on his hands and knees, searching for 1 cent, kneeling right next to $500 he cannot see. His greed is so narrow, so fixated on the specific small thing he has decided to want, that it blinds him to the actual money right in front of him. That is a genuinely sharp piece of writing about how obsession works. A Season 7 episode, The Scent of Money, takes the same idea and makes the physical danger explicit. In it, Krabs discovers that Gary, SpongeBob's pet snail, has become magnetic and can attract coins. Naturally, rather than wonder why or worry about the snail, Krabs immediately sees an income stream. He borrows Gary and uses him to vacuum up loose change from all over Bikini Bottom, dragging the poor snail through laundromats and arcades, even disguising himself and Gary in order to work the scheme more efficiently. And the greed, as it so often does, turns on him physically. All that attracted metal builds and builds until a tidal wave of coins comes crashing down and crushes Mr. Krabs, sending him to the hospital. The final joke is that the coins he collected end up going straight to paying his own medical bills, the exact bills his coin scheme caused. He nets nothing. He is injured, hospitalized, and the money he gathered by hurting an animal circles right back out of his hands to cover the injury. It is revealed, incidentally, that Gary became magnetic by swallowing a magnet, a Little Mermaid Man souvenir, so even the miracle that started the whole thing was an accident. The message the show keeps sending, over and over, is that his cheapness costs him more than generosity ever would. Every one of these schemes loses money in the end. The penny obsession wastes days. The coin scheme lands him in a hospital bed. The moldy patty poisoned him. Greed, in this show, is not shrewd. It is self-sabotage dressed up as thrift. And then there is Krabs a la mode, from Season 5, which might be the purest distillation of his cheapness winning and losing at the same time. The premise is that Krabs keeps the thermostat in the Krusty Krab locked at 62 degrees, because heating the building costs money and he refuses to spend it, even as his customers and employees shiver. Plankton, seeing an opening, cranks the cold even further and turns the restaurant into a frozen wasteland. an icebox he gleefully renames the Frosty Crab, hoping the cold will drive Krabs out of business. And here is the thing that makes Krabs Krabs. Even as the entire restaurant freezes solid, even as everyone is turning blue, he will not pay to turn on the heat. He would rather let the building become a glacier than spend $1 warming it. But then his greed, which is also a kind of animal cunning, finds the angle. He realizes a frozen restaurant can be turned into a profitable indoor ice rink and swimming attraction, and he converts the disaster into a new revenue stream, even pausing to thank a frozen plankton for the idea. He turns being frozen out of business into a business. It is the cheapskate's victory in its most concentrated form, refusing to spend, absorbing enormous discomfort, and somehow monetizing the very attack meant to destroy him. It is worth pausing here to give credit to the performance, because a lot of what makes these episodes work is Clancy Brown's voice doing something specific with the money. Brown actually won a Daytime Emmy in 2010, an individual acting award specifically for playing Mr. Krabs. That is separate from all the technical and sound awards the show has racked up over the years. It was recognition of the performance itself, and if you listen to what he does in these greed episodes, you can hear why. The money crying, the way his voice cracks and wails when $1 is threatened, is played completely sincerely, as if he is genuinely grieving, and then, the moment the money is safe, it vanishes without a trace. As Brown himself has pointed out, the grief is real while it lasts, and evaporates the instant cash flows in. Selling that, making a whale over 62 cents land as real emotion and then dropping it instantly is a genuinely difficult acting job, and the Emmy was for exactly that. There is one more thing worth saying about the shape of the restaurant itself, because it is designed around this hunger in a way that is easy to miss. The Krusty Krab was deliberately built to look like an old-fashioned New England lobster trap, and that was a stated design intention, tied to Hillenburg's own younger days working as a fry cook and boiling lobsters over the summers. A lobster trap is a beautiful and slightly sinister object when you think about what it is for. It is a structure designed to be inviting from the outside, easy to enter, and very hard to leave. It catches living things by offering them something they want and then closing around them. So the most beloved restaurant in Bikini Bottom, the place customers happily wander into for a burger, is shaped, on purpose, like a device built to lure and hold prey. Read against everything else we have talked about, the greed and the exploitation and the fine print, promises no one can collect on. The trap shape stops feeling like a coincidence. The building is a trap that catches customers and turns them into money, and its owner is the thing waiting inside it. Hillenburg would never have spelled that out, and he did not need to. He just built the restaurant in the shape of the idea and let it sit there, in plain view, for 25 years. The title of tonight's video calls it a money addiction, and I have been using words like greed and hoarding, but there is a stranger word that fits him better than either, and it is love. Because the thing that separates Mr. Krabs from an ordinary miser is that he does not treat money as a means to anything. He treats it as a being. He talks to it. He sings to it. He grieves it when it leaves, and he courts it when it arrives. Money, for him, is not a tool. It is a person, and in a couple of astonishing episodes the show takes that literally and lets him try to have a relationship with it. The first is a Season 5 episode called Money Talks, and it opens with Krabs making a wish that most people would recognize as a warning sign. He wishes he could actually talk to his money. And the Flying Dutchman, that same ghost pirate who came for him over the moldy patty, grants the wish, in exchange for his soul, because of course he does. Suddenly Krabs can hear his money speak, and the twist is beautifully cruel. The money does not want to be hoarded. It begs to be spent. It wants to be out in the world, circulating, doing what money is for, and being locked in a vault by a crab who will never release it is, to the money, a kind of imprisonment. Krabs is horrified. He has spent his whole life keeping money still, and now the money itself is telling him that stillness is misery. He tries to undo the deal, to cancel the wish, and the Dutchman reveals the full ugliness of Krabs' situation. Krabs cannot simply back out, because he has already sold his soul, many times over, to a whole line of creditors. There is a queue of ghosts who all hold a claim on him. And the final degradation, the detail the whole episode is built to deliver, is that at one point, short on cash on payday, Krabs sold his soul to SpongeBob for $5. His soul, The thing the Dutchman wanted, the thing worth an eternity in a locker of socks, went for $5 to his own fry cook because he needed to make payroll. His soul is not priceless to him. It is inventory, and it is cheap. The other episode is the one that most literally fulfills the promise of tonight's title, and it comes from the later era of the show. It is called Married to Money, and it begins with Plankton taunting Krabs with an old playground jab. "If you love money so much," Plankton says, "why don't you marry it?" For most people, that is an insult. For Mr. Krabs, it is apparently an idea he had never considered but immediately embraces, because Plankton, sensing the opening, builds him a bride. He constructs a robot woman made entirely out of dollar bills, a walking, talking figure assembled from cash, and he names her Kashina. The whole thing is a trap, obviously. Kashina is a puppet Plankton controls, designed to seduce Krabs and coax the secret formula out of him through pillow talk. And it very nearly works, because Krabs falls completely, hopelessly in love with a woman made of money. He courts her. He proposes. He is ready to marry a pile of animated currency, and in his infatuation, he comes dangerously close to giving away the formula, the one thing he guards above all else, because he is in love. What saves him is an accident. A tear, of all things, drops into Kashina's mouth, and short-circuits Plankton's controls, and the money bride explodes before the secret comes out. But think about what the episode is willing to show you. Given the chance to literally marry money, Mr. Krabs said yes, without hesitation. The insult was a fantasy he was delighted to live out. That robot bride did not come from nowhere. She is the endpoint of a much smaller, older habit, which is that Krabs names his cash register the way other people name a pet or a boat. And in a detail I find genuinely charming, the show cannot even keep the name of the register consistent. In one episode he calls it Cashy. In another, the name appears spelled slightly differently as Cashy. It is a tiny continuity wobble, the kind of thing that happens across a couple hundred episodes made by different writers, but it tells you the register is a recurring character in his emotional life, a companion he addresses by name, long before Plankton weaponized that attachment by building him a whole woman out of money and calling her Kashina. The progression is almost touching if you lay it out. First he names the register, then he talks to his money, then he tries to marry it. The affection escalates the same way the greed does, from a quirk to a defining trait to something that nearly destroys him. There is a broader point buried in all of this about the difference between wanting money and worshipping it, and the show, whether it means to or not, keeps drawing the line clearly. A person who wants money wants what it can do. They want a house, security, a good meal, freedom from worry. That person spends, because spending is the point. Mr. Krabs is not that person. The money that talks to him in Money Talks is unhappy precisely because he refuses to let it do anything. He does not want a house money could buy. He wants the money. The having is the whole experience. And that is genuinely closer to addiction than to greed. Because an addict does not want the thing for its uses either. They want the thing. The accumulation is the reward, detached from any purpose the accumulation could serve, which is why he can be surrounded by wealth and still be miserable the instant a single coin is threatened. Even his name across the world reflects how central this identity is, because the character travels under different labels depending on where you watch him. In the Italian television dub, he is renamed Mr. Kreb, with the money still front and center in how he is presented, though oddly, the Italian version of the movie keeps the original Mr. Krabs. In the Dutch dub, he becomes Meneer Krabs. In Latin America, as we heard, he is Don Cangrejo, which simply means Mr. Crab. The spellings shift, the pronunciations shift, but the essential figure survives every border intact, because the thing that defines him is not language. It is the relationship to money, and that reads in any tongue. You do not need to understand a word of Italian or Dutch to watch a crab cradle his cash register and know exactly who he is. The love of money is his native language, and it needs no dub. If the personification episodes show you the strangeness of his love for money, the scheme episodes show you its reach, because there is almost no institution, no relationship, and no living thing that Mr. Krabs will not convert into a revenue stream if he sees an angle. The show returns to this well constantly, and the schemes are worth walking through together, because laid side by side they form a kind of catalog of everything he is willing to exploit. Start with the one that treats living creatures as raw material, a Season 2 episode called Jellyfish Hunter. It begins innocently, with Krabs discovering that the jelly SpongeBob harvests from jellyfish makes a delicious condiment, and deciding to sell it at the Krusty Krab. The condiment is a hit, and that success is the trap, because the moment it works, Krabs cannot stop. He pushes SpongeBob to catch more jellyfish, and more, harvesting them faster than the fields can recover, until Jellyfish Fields is nearly emptied, down to a handful of survivors. And then the episode reveals what Krabs has really been building. Behind the scenes, he has set up a secret factory, an automated operation where captured jellyfish are hooked into machines that milk them, roll them, squeeze them with mechanical citrus presses, and even tickle them, draining the jelly out of them industrially, hurting them for product. It is a genuinely disturbing image for a kids' show, a factory farm run on the suffering of animals, purely to keep a condiment in stock. SpongeBob, horrified, frees them all, and the jellyfish take their revenge by swarming and stinging Krabs, after which he goes back to plain patties. The episode punishes him, but the picture it leaves behind is stark. Offered a profitable product, he immediately scaled it into a torture facility, because scaling was the obvious next move, and the animals were just inputs. Then there is the one where he monetizes children, Krabby Land, from Season 3. The premise is that summer break has arrived and the Krusty Krab is quiet, so Krabs builds a cut-rate amusement park outside the restaurant purely to extract money from bored kids and their parents. And every corner he cuts is a small masterpiece of cheapness. The slide is made of cardboard. The ball pit is filled not with soft plastic balls, but with bowling balls, heavy enough to hurt. The children are made to sign what are presented as coloring books, but are actually liability waivers, legal documents disguised as a kid's activity, so that Krabs cannot be sued when the bowling balls do their work. And the darkest gag is what the kids actually respond to. They are bored and unimpressed by everything until SpongeBob, playing a mascot called Krabby the Clown, gets hurt, at which point they cheer. So SpongeBob, ever devoted, begins injuring himself for their entertainment, taking real pain to keep the customers happy, while Krabs counts the money. It is the exploitation of the employee and the exploitation of the customer folded into a single scheme, with a child's coloring book turned into a legal shield on top. Krabs will monetize the truth itself too, which is the engine of a Season 6 episode called The Krabby Chronicle. Krabs learns that tabloid newspapers charge by the word and make a fortune, and so he starts his own gossip paper. The problem is that real news does not sell the way lies do, and so Krabs forces SpongeBob to become his reporter and to write cruel fabrications about the residents of Bikini Bottom. Under threat of losing his beloved spatula, SpongeBob writes stories that ruin people. He prints lies that destroy Mrs. Puff's reputation as a driving instructor. He fabricates a story that gets a fitness enthusiast banned from the gym. The paper profits by manufacturing pain and selling it by the word, and Krabs sits at the top of it collecting the money, entirely insulated, until SpongeBob finally turns the paper against him by printing the truth, that Krabs is the one behind all the lies, and a furious mob takes back its money. It is one of the meaner things Krabs does to SpongeBob specifically, because it forces the kindest character in the show to become an instrument of cruelty against his own neighbors, all so the register fills. He will even sell the restaurant itself, which is the plot of a Season 4 episode called Selling Out. Krabs, offered a large sum, retires and sells the Krusty Krab to a corporation, which promptly turns it into a slick chain outlet called Krabby Mondays, run by a manager named Carl. But retirement does not suit Krabs. Bored, restless, and eventually kicked out of the house by Pearl, he wanders back to his old restaurant and discovers the horror at the center of the corporate version. The Krabby Patties being served are not food at all. They are gray blobs, spray-painted to look like real patties, sold to unsuspecting customers as the genuine article. Krabs is outraged, and it is worth noticing what outrages him, because it is not simply that customers are being cheated. It is that the thing he built, the thing that carries his name and his life's work, has been hollowed out into a fake. He exposes the fraud, floods the place, and buys his restaurant back at full price, taking a loss on the whole round trip. Even here, in a rare moment of principle, the principle is tangled up with ownership. The Krusty Krab is his, and a corporation turning it into painted sludge is an insult he pays real money to undo. This is the point where the real world catches up with the fiction in a way I love, because the name Krusty Krab is itself a piece of valuable property that has been fought over in actual courts. The Krusty Krab is a legally protected trademark, and in 2018, the company behind SpongeBob won a real lawsuit, decided in a United States federal appeals court, against a man who had tried to open actual seafood restaurants called the Krusty Krab. The court agreed that the fictional restaurant was a protected mark, that you could not simply open a real one and trade on the name. And yet, in one of those gaps between law and reality, an unlicensed near replica of the Krusty Krab, built to look like the show's restaurant and staffed by costumed employees, actually opened in 2014 in Ramallah, in the Palestinian territories, and was never sued at all. So there really is, or was, a physical Krusty Krab you could walk into, existing in the space the lawyers never reached, which is the kind of detail that makes the fictional greed feel oddly load-bearing in the real world. There is one more scheme worth adding, because it is the one where his greed briefly makes him an accidental innovator, a Season 4 episode called Krusty Towers. On vacation, Krabs is shocked by a hotel bill, appalled that a hotel could charge so much, especially for something like an overpriced hamburger, and instead of resenting the hotel, he envies it. He realizes how much money hotels make and immediately converts the Krusty Krab into one, adopting a grand motto that they shall never deny a guest even the most ridiculous request. SpongeBob and Squidward, of course, weaponize that motto against him, making requests so absurd and so expensive to fulfill that the whole enterprise collapses around him, quite literally, as the building comes apart. It is the same lesson as always. His greed spots a real opportunity. Hotels do make money, and then his cheapness and his inability to think past the dollar sign turn the opportunity into rubble. I should mention, because it speaks to how good some of this writing actually is, that the show's Krabs-driven material has been recognized at the highest levels of the industry. An episode built around a Krabby Patty marketing panic, called Fear of a Krabby Patty, won the Annie Award for Best Writing, the animation industry's own top honor for writing, at the ceremony held in early 2006. These are not just gags tossed off. The best of these greed stories are award-winning pieces of comic writing, which is part of why they hold up to this kind of slow examination in the first place. There is real craft under the counting and the wailing. We have spent a long time on the money, which is right, because the money is the subject. But there are 3 relationships in his life that the money constantly runs up against. 3 people who force the question of whether anything can outweigh $1 for him. And the first and most important of them is his daughter. So let us talk about Pearl, and about the fact that Mr. Krabs, a red crab, is the father of a teenage whale. That species gap is the first thing everyone notices, and the show has famously never explained it on screen. Pearl is a sperm whale, an enormous pink teenager who towers over her tiny crustacean father, and the two of them live together in the hollow anchor as an ordinary, if visually absurd, single-parent household. What the show tells us, mostly through the crew and through merchandise rather than through any episode, is that Krabs married a whale, a character referred to only as Mrs. Krabs, who is Pearl's mother, and that Pearl is his biological daughter, not adopted. I want to be careful here, because the internet is full of confident theories that Pearl must be adopted, that a crab could not father a whale, and the show simply never engages with any of that. It treats Pearl as his child, full stop, and it leaves the biology as one of those things the series expects you to accept, the way you accept that a sponge and a starfish are best friends. Mrs. Krabs herself never appears. She is barely a character, more of an implied fact, a mother who exists in the backstory and nowhere in the frame. That absence turns out to be deliberate, and it connects to a genuinely fascinating piece of production history. There was, at one point, a plan to explain all of this. A double-length special was written, in the era of the 5th season, that would have finally revealed Pearl's whale parentage and established the identity of her mother, Mrs. Krabs. The whole mystery resolved in one big story, and Stephen Hillenburg killed it. He insisted the special be shelved, permanently, and it never went into production. Think about that decision. The show had, in hand, an answer to one of its most asked questions, a finished or nearly finished story that would have closed the loop, and the creator chose to leave the question open forever rather than tell it. There is a real philosophy in that. Hillenburg seemed to understand that some gaps are better left as gaps, that the strangeness of a crab raising a whale is funnier and warmer as an unexplained fact than it could ever be as an explained one. The mystery is load-bearing. Explaining it would have made it smaller. The reason Pearl is a whale in the first place is a design rule, and it is a lovely one. Hillenburg had a hard guideline that every member of the main cast had to be a different kind of sea creature, so that no two central characters shared an animal. SpongeBob is a sponge, Patrick a starfish, Squidward an octopus, Krabs a crab, Sandy a squirrel, Plankton a plankton, and so the parent and child could not both be crabs. Pearl had to be something else. And the whale specifically came from Hillenburg's own life, because before he made cartoons, when he was working as a marine science educator, one of his jobs involved supervising whale-watching tours at the Ocean Institute in Dana Point, California. He knew whales, professionally, up close. So when he needed a large sea creature for Krabs' daughter, he reached for the animal he had spent real time with on the open water. Pearl is a whale because her creator used to take people out to see whales for a living. Even in her deepest joke, The Impossible Daughter of a Crab, there is a real biologist's real memory. Here is a detail from the earliest development that I think is quietly sweet. In the original concept art, before the pilot locked their looks, Krabs and Pearl were drawn in matching clothing, the same yellow and orange outfits, father and daughter dressed as a set. That was changed before the show aired, their colors and costumes individualized so that Pearl could read as her own person, rather than a small copy of her dad. But the matching clothes tell you how Hillenburg first imagined the pair, as a unit, a father and his girl in the same colors, and it is worth remembering that Krabs was actually created because of Pearl. Hillenburg realized, developing the show, that Pearl needed a parent figure, and Mr. Krabs was in part the answer to that need. The greedy crab we have spent all night dissecting exists, at the root, because a whale needed a father. Which brings us to the episode where the money and the daughter collide most directly, a Season 4 story called Whale of a Birthday. It is Pearl's 16th birthday, a milestone, and Krabs, being Krabs, tries to celebrate it as cheaply as humanly possible. The decorations are pitiful. The birthday cake is made of cardboard. In place of a real gift or a real spread, he presents a so-called statue that is actually just a lump of raw patty meat. And rather than pay to hire Pearl's favorite band, a group called Boys Who Cry, he forces Squidward to impersonate them, to dress up and perform as the band she loves, because an employee in a costume is free, and a real band costs money. Pearl, naturally, is humiliated and heartbroken, because every corner her father cut is a message about how little he was willing to spend on her, and to a 16-year-old, that reads as how little she is worth to him. What saves the party is SpongeBob, who takes Krabs' credit card and maxes it out buying Pearl real gifts, spending Krabs' money for him because Krabs could not bring himself to do it. And the thing is, Krabs does love her. The episode is not about a father who does not care. It is about a father whose love is real, but whose reflex to save money is so strong that it overrides his ability to show that love, so that his own cheapness keeps sabotaging the relationship he cares about most. He wanted Pearl to have a good birthday. He just could not make his claws open the wallet to pay for it, and it took his fry cook, spending on his behalf, to bridge the gap between what he felt and what he was willing to give. That gap is the whole tragedy of him as a father, and the show keeps returning to it. He is not cold. He is not a man who fails to love his daughter. He is a man for whom every expression of love has a price tag attached, and who flinches at the price tag even when the love behind it is genuine. When he does manage to spend on Pearl, it visibly costs him something, an internal wrench you can hear in the performance, the money grief warring with the paternal warmth. And more often than not, it takes someone else, SpongeBob usually, to actually complete the gesture. To do the spending Krabs cannot do himself. There is something almost poignant in a father who has to outsource his own generosity to his employee, because his hands will not obey his heart when a bill is involved. It is worth holding Pearl in mind as we go forward, because she is the single strongest piece of evidence that Krabs is not simply a villain. A pure miser would have no soft spot, no place where the calculus breaks down. Pearl is that place. She is the person who can make him spend, even if he needs help to finish the act. And the fact that the show gave the greediest character on television a daughter he genuinely loves, and then refused, at Hillenburg's insistence, to ever fully explain her, tells you the writers understood something about him. The love and the greed are not opposites to be resolved. They live in the same crab, at the same time, permanently at war, and neither one ever wins for good. The second relationship that pulls against the money is romantic, and it is one of the very few genuine romances the show ever commits to. Mr. Krabs and Mrs. Puff, the anxious pufferfish who runs the boating school, are an actual couple, a rare thing in a series that mostly keeps its characters single. And the way their romance is written tells you everything, because with Mrs. Puff, Krabs expresses love the only way he really knows how, which is by the agonizing act of spending money on her. The episode that establishes them is a Season 2 story called Krusty Love, and it is essentially a study of a cheapskate trying to court someone. Krabs falls for Mrs. Puff, and courtship, of course, costs money, and so the episode becomes a running gag about the physical pain it causes him to spend on a woman he genuinely likes. He lavishes what is, by his standards, a fortune on her, and every dollar visibly hurts. The show is a little cagey about the exact figure, and I would not put too much weight on any specific number you might see quoted online, because those are not reliable. What matters is the emotional accounting. For most characters, spending on a date is nothing. For Krabs, it is the deepest possible expression of feeling, because he is giving up the thing he loves most, money, for a person, and the sacrifice is real precisely because it wounds him. His love language is literally the currency he worships, which means every gift is a small self-mutilation, and that is somehow the most romantic thing he is capable of. What is strange about the Krabs and Mrs. Puff relationship is how quietly and how slowly the show actually made it official, which is one of those production details that reframes years of the series once you know it. Although the two of them are clearly linked from Krusty Love onward and appear together in the background across many episodes, the show did not confirm them as a genuine kissing couple until much later, in a Season 10 episode called Whirly Brains. And when it did confirm it, it did something sneaky. That episode reveals that Krabs and Mrs. Puff have, at that point, been dating for 16 years, and it stages what is presented as their first kiss. So the writers reached back and retroactively backdated the whole relationship, declaring that it had secretly been going on for 16 years, quietly planted across a decade of background cameos and tie-in comics before they ever made it text. It is a nice trick, because it means that if you go back and rewatch, all those little moments where the two of them are near each other, all those background glances, retroactively become part of a long, slow romance that the show was building in plain sight without telling you. The relationship was hiding in the margins for years, and Whirly Brains simply pulled it into the center and put a number on it. There is a third figure worth folding in here, because she complicates the picture of where Krabs came from, and that is his mother. Krabs has a mother, usually called Betsy or Mama Krabs, and she is a wonderful corrective to any theory that his greed is genetic. Betsy is not greedy. She is a stern, respectable old crab with white hair and glasses, temperamental in her way, quick to punish her son, and notably strict about manners, disliking bad language, and money madness is simply not part of her character. Whatever made Eugene the way he is, it did not obviously come from his mother, which pushes the origin of the greed back onto circumstance, onto the poverty of his childhood, rather than onto blood. Betsy is also, like the cash register, a character the show cannot quite keep consistent, and the inconsistencies are revealing. In her earliest appearances, she was voiced by the show's own Paul Tibbitt in a deliberately deep, manly voice, an odd, gruff sound for an old lady crab. Later, she was recast and voiced by the actress Serena Irwin, this time with a full Irish accent, a completely different vocal identity. And in a tie-in book, one called Mother Knows Best, she is drawn differently again, without her glasses, dressed in pink with lipstick, looking roughly the same age as her own son, rather than a generation older. So even Krabs' mother drifts, in voice and in face, across her appearances, the way so much of his world does, assembled by different hands over decades who did not always agree on the details. The episode that puts Betsy and the money together most cleverly is a Season 4 story called Enemy In-Law, and it ties back to the formula in a way that matters for how we understand the whole enterprise. In it, Plankton, ever scheming for the secret recipe, tries a new route to it, which is to romance Krabs' mother. He begins dating Mama Krabs, purely to get close enough to the family to extract the formula, and Krabs, panicking at the sight of his rival cozying up to his mom, blurts out the thing he should never have said, which is that his mother, and indeed his whole family, knows the secret formula. It is a genuinely important line, because it confirms in the clearest possible terms that the Krabby Patty recipe is not Eugene's private secret. It is a family recipe. His mother knows it, the family knows it. The lone genius guarding his one secret is again a myth. And the episode ends with a small piece of grace, because once Mama Krabs realizes that Plankton only ever wanted the recipe, that his affection was a con aimed at the formula, she rejects him. The mother, unlike the son, is not for sale, and she will not be used to get at the family's treasure. In a series full of characters who can be bought, Betsy Krabs quietly cannot be, which makes her one of the more principled figures in the whole cast, and a pointed contrast to the son she raised. Put those three relationships together, the daughter, the girlfriend, and the mother, and you get a clearer map of the man than any single Greed episode gives you. With Pearl, the money keeps sabotaging a love that is real, so that he needs help to spend on his own child. With Mrs. Puff, the money becomes the very medium of love, so that spending on her is his purest romantic act precisely because it hurts. And with Betsy, the money reveals its own limits, because his mother refuses to be part of the transaction at all, standing outside the economy that governs everything else in his life. 3 women, 3 completely different relationships to his one obsession, and in all 3, the money is the thing being negotiated. He cannot have a relationship that is not, on some level, also about the money, because the money is how he understands value, and love is a kind of value, so love keeps getting run through the same broken calculator as everything else. That is not villainy. It is a very specific kind of damage, the damage of a man who learned, young and poor, that money was the measure of safety, and who never found another measuring stick for anything, including the people he loves. No account of Mr. Krabs and his money is complete without the one figure whose entire existence is organized around trying to take it, and that is Sheldon Plankton, the tiny green owner of the failing restaurant across the road. The rivalry between them is the central engine of the whole show, more constant than any romance or any scheme, and the crucial thing to understand about it, the thing that gives it its sadness, is that it did not begin as hatred, it began as friendship. We touched on this earlier, the origin where 2 bullied kids buy a failed burger joint and accidentally invent the patty during a fight that tears their recipe in half. I will not walk through it again, but I want to sit with what it means, because it changes the entire flavor of their war. Krabs and Plankton were best friends, the poor kid and the tiny nerd, 2 outcasts who had each other when they had nothing else. The rivalry is not 2 enemies who always hated each other. It is a broken friendship, a closeness that curdled over a recipe and a torn piece of paper, and every scheme Plankton launches to steal the formula is, underneath, an attempt to take back something from the person who used to be his only friend. There is a detail that makes this even more pointed, which is that the 2 of them share a birthday. In the show's own dating, both Krabs and Plankton were born on the same day, the 2 of them arriving together, growing up together, and splitting apart, so that the man and his nemesis are, in a sense, twins of a kind, born on one date and bound to each other for life whether they like it or not. The enemy is not a stranger. He is the oldest friend, and the shared birthday is the writers quietly insisting on that bond even through all the hatred. For most of the series, the rivalry is comic, a game of siege and defense, Plankton launching some doomed scheme to get the formula, and Krabs swatting it away. But there is one place where the show let the balance of cruelty tip all the way over, and it is important to look at it directly, because it is the strongest evidence that late-era Krabs was written as something genuinely dark. The episode is a Season 7 story called One Course Meal, and it is widely considered one of the worst and most disturbing things the show ever produced. The premise is that Krabs discovers Plankton has a deep, genuine phobia, a terror of whales, and rather than use this knowledge for a simple prank, Krabs weaponizes it relentlessly. He disguises himself as Pearl, his own whale daughter, and uses that disguise to terrorize Plankton over and over, exploiting his phobia so thoroughly that Plankton is driven to a suicidal breakdown. The episode actually shows Plankton, hopeless and broken, lying down in the road hoping to be run over, wanting to die, because of the psychological torture Krabs has inflicted. SpongeBob, watching this happen, begs Krabs to stop, recognizes that something horrifying is occurring, and Krabs simply will not stop. There is no soft landing, no last-minute grace. It is Krabs at his cruelest, a bully driving his oldest friend towards suicide for sport, and it sits very uneasily against the lovable cheapskate of the early seasons. Because that episode is so infamous, a lot of misinformation has grown up around it, and I want to correct one piece specifically because it gets repeated as fact. There is a widely told story that the crew, that Hillenburg or Clancy Brown or Mr. Lawrence or one of the writers, publicly apologized for one-course meal, that someone involved came out and said sorry for the suicide content. That story is not verified. There is no reliable primary source for any such apology. No one who actually worked on the episode has ever gone on the record apologizing for it, as far as anyone has been able to document. It is one of those things that feels like it should be true, that the internet has decided must have happened, and there is simply no evidence that it did. What is documented, and this is real, is that the episode received an edit in the United Kingdom and Ireland for a completely different reason, a technical one. A sequence involving thunder and lightning flashing around Pearl in one of Plankton's nightmares was altered over concerns about photosensitivity, the risk that the rapid flashing could trigger seizures in vulnerable viewers, and the flashing was later slowed down. So the real edit to One Course Meal was about strobing lights and seizure safety, not about the suicide content, and the famous apology never happened. It is a good example of how the darkness of an episode attracts stories that feel emotionally right but turn out to be invented. The other place the rivalry reaches its highest stakes is the first movie, from 2004, and it is the one time Plankton actually wins, at least for a while. His grand plan in the film, which he calls Plan Z, is to steal King Neptune's crown and frame Mr. Krabs for the theft. It works. Neptune, believing Krabs stole his crown, freezes him, essentially petrifying him, taking him out of the picture for most of the movie, so that Krabs spends the film as a frozen statue, effectively dead. And with Krabs incapacitated and unable to defend anything, Plankton finally does the thing he has spent his whole life trying to do. He steals the secret formula. He gets it. He opens a Krusty Krab knockoff and briefly enslaves the population of Bikini Bottom with mind control helmets, running the town on stolen patties. SpongeBob and Patrick have to retrieve the crown and save a frozen Krabs to set things right. But the key fact, the one that matters for everything we have said about the formula tonight, is that Plankton succeeded. The formula is not some impregnable secret that can never be taken. It has been taken, on the biggest possible stage, in the franchise's own flagship film. Krabs' entire fortune, the thing he guards with his soul, was stolen out from under him the one time he was frozen solid and could not protect it, which tells you how much of its security depends simply on Krabs being conscious and standing in front of the safe. There is a gentler episode that flips the rivalry around and in doing so, quietly defends Krabs, and it is worth ending this stretch on, because it is a rare moment of sympathy for the man. It is a Season 3 episode called The Algae's Always Greener, and in it, Plankton magically swaps lives with Krabs, taking over the Krusty Krab and putting Krabs in the chum bucket. Plankton has spent his whole life certain that Krabs has it easy, that the formula and the success are unearned, that if he only had the restaurant, everything would be wonderful. And the swap teaches him otherwise, immediately and painfully. Running the Krusty Krab turns out to be miserable. The customers are demanding and absurd. SpongeBob is an exhausting, overwhelming presence. Squidward is useless. And there is a teenage whale daughter to deal with on top of all of it. Plankton discovers, in the space of one episode, that Krabs' life is genuinely hard, that the empire he envied is a daily grind of headaches he never appreciated from across the street, and he switches back in defeat. It is a small thing, but it matters, because it is the show gently making the case that whatever Krabs has, he also works for, that the fortune sits on top of a job most people, including his own nemesis, could not stand to do. The greed is real, but so is the labor underneath it, and for one episode even Plankton has to admit it. If you try to pin down the basic facts of Mr. Krabs' life, when he was born, where he came from, how old he is, you run into a wall very quickly, because the show has never cared about keeping any of it straight. And rather than being annoying, the contradictions are strangely fitting, because a character who exists to be greedy in a joke does not need a coherent biography, and the writers clearly agreed. So what you get, when you actually gather the evidence, is a man with at least 3 different birthdays and a life story told several incompatible ways. The birthdays come from his driver's licenses of all things, which the show has flashed on screen more than once, and if you actually read them, they do not agree. In one episode, a license gives his birth date as the 30th of November 1942, at an address on Anchor Way. In another episode, a different license puts his birth year in 1960, on the 25th of September, at a different address entirely. And a third appearance, tied to his Navy days, shows yet another license at yet another Anchor address. So depending on which episode's prop you believe, Mr. Krabs was born in either 1942 or 1960, birth years a full 18 years apart, which is not a small discrepancy. It is not the difference between 2 close guesses. It is the difference between 2 different generations. The show has never reconciled them and shows no sign of ever intending to, because on any given day the joke needed whatever the joke needed, and continuity was not invited. That 1942 date, incidentally, is the one fans lean on for the popular theory that Krabs fought in a specific mid-century war, doing the math from the birth year on the prop, but I would keep that firmly in the theory column, because the show itself never states which war he served in, only that he served and came home depressed. The contradictions get deeper when you go back before the Krusty Krab, because the origin of that restaurant is told in more than one way, and it is worth being precise about this, because it is a spot where a lot of retellings get muddled. There is really only one story that explains the origin of the building itself, and that is the retirement home story we covered earlier, the bankrupt Rusty Krab that Krabs bought and renamed with a stroke of paint. The other origin stories that get tossed around are not about the building at all. They are about his personal or business past. The tale of him and Plankton inventing the patty in a failed burger joint is the origin of the business and the rivalry, not the building. And the pirate history, which we are about to get into, is the origin of the man, his life before the restaurant, not proof that the restaurant is any particular structure. When people say Mr. Krabs has 2 contradictory origins, they are usually flattening 3 separate stories, about 3 separate things, into one confused claim. The building came from a nursing home. The business came from a torn recipe. And the man, according to at least one episode, came from the sea, as a pirate. Those are different questions with different answers, and only the first is really about where the Krusty Krab physically came from. What every version of his backstory agrees on, the one constant that survives all the contradictions, is the poverty. Whatever year he was born, whatever war he did or did not fight in, the show consistently grounds his money hunger in a poor childhood, a scarcity so deep that it shaped everything after it. Flashbacks show him as a bullied child, mocked for being poor, growing up in what the series frames as an underwater version of a Great Depression, a time of genuine want. This is the emotional bedrock under all the comedy, and it is the thing that keeps the greed from being random. He is not greedy because greed is funny, although it is. Within the story, he is greedy because he was once a child who had nothing, and who learned, in the way that children learn things too early and too permanently, that money was the difference between safety and suffering. The first dollar and the first dime, those 2 sacred coins, make sense only against that background. They are not just his first earnings. They are the first proof, to a kid who had been poor his whole life, that the suffering could end, that he could hold something between himself and the scarcity. He has spent every episode since building a wall of money between himself and a childhood that never quite let go. And yet, even that clean and sympathetic reading gets complicated by the show's own carelessness, because his family tree does not match his poverty at all. This is one of the stranger unresolved things about him. On one hand, the flashbacks insist he grew up dirt poor, bullied for being broke. On the other hand, his canon ancestors include genuine wealth and even royalty. His family line, as the show has drawn it across various episodes, includes a medieval monarch, a King Krabs who ruled an underwater kingdom in a kind of aquatic Middle Ages, and it includes wealthy pirate captains, most notably his own grandfather, a fearsome buccaneer. A boy descended from kings and pirate captains, growing up in poverty so severe it defined his entire psychology, is a contradiction the show never addresses. because the royal ancestors exist for their own jokes, and the poor childhood exists for its jokes, and the two were never meant to be held in the same hand at the same time. If you try to build one coherent lineage, it falls apart. A king in the family tree and a starving childhood do not belong to the same story, and the show is perfectly happy to keep both, because coherence was never the point. It is worth saying plainly, since we are on the subject of what is and is not real about his life, that Mr. Krabs is not, despite one of the internet's favorite pieces of misinformation, canonically dead or murdered. There is a widely shared document, passed around online for years, sometimes titled as The Trial of SpongeBob, or framed as the question of who killed Mr. Krabs, which describes Krabs found dead in the Krusty Krab, his throat cut, blunt trauma to the head, with SpongeBob on trial for the murder. It went viral, and a lot of people came away believing it was a real leaked script or a real lost episode. It is neither. It is an educational document, a mock trial worksheet, the kind of thing made as a school exercise to teach students about courtroom procedure, using SpongeBob characters as a hook. It was never an episode. It was never a script. Krabs is alive, the show is still running, and the grisly death scene people remember comes from a classroom assignment, not from Bikini Bottom. I mention it here because it is exactly the kind of thing that attaches itself to a character this famous, a fake death that feels real because it circulated widely, and it is worth knowing, when you settle in to think about him, that the man is very much still standing behind his register, still counting, still alive. So the honest summary of his origins is that there is no single honest summary. He was born in 2 different years. His restaurant came from a nursing home, his recipe from a broken friendship, and his bloodline from both kings and paupers. The only fixed star in all of it is the poverty and the money hunger that grew out of it, and even that sits uneasily next to a royal ancestor or two. He is a character assembled over 25 years by dozens of writers who each reached for whatever backstory a given joke required. And what is remarkable is that out of all that contradiction, a single coherent person still emerges, because the one thing they all agreed on, the love of money, was strong enough to hold the rest of the mess together. The pirate strand of his family deserves its own moment, because it is where the greed gets a bloodline, and it is the source of one of the most misunderstood claims about the Krusty Krab. The episode is a Season 6 story called Grandpappy the Pirate, and it introduces Redbeard Krabs, Eugene's grandfather, a genuine pirate, over 100 years old, who arrives believing that his grandson is still living the pirate life. Krabs, desperate not to disappoint the old man, does something very revealing. He disguises the Krusty Krab to look like a moving pirate ship. He has a fan blow to fill an improvised sail. He has Squidward wave cardboard cutouts to look like passing waves. He dresses the whole restaurant up as a vessel at sea, all so his grandfather will believe the family pirate tradition lives on. I want to be precise about this, because it is where the popular claim that the Krusty Krab is literally Mr. Krabs' old pirate ship comes from, and that claim overreaches. The show does establish, in this episode, that Krabs once had a pirate past, that he owned and captained a ship, and sold it when he retired from that life. That is his personal history. But the restaurant is not that ship. The whole comedy of the episode depends on the Krusty Krab not being a ship, on Krabs having to fake it with a fan and cardboard, on the illusion being a flimsy prop job that his grandfather sees straight through. If the building actually were his old pirate vessel, there would be nothing to fake. So the pirate ship is a real part of the man's biography, and emphatically not the origin of the building. And anyone who tells you the Krusty Krab is secretly Mr. Krabs' pirate ship is taking a prop illusion and mistaking it for a foundation. What the episode does confirm, beautifully, is that the greed is hereditary in spirit, even if the poverty is not. Redbeard sees through the ship disguise, but he is not angry, because he finds something in the restaurant he genuinely admires, and it is not his grandson's honesty. It is the prices. Redbeard is impressed by how much the Krusty Krab charges, delighted by the markup, and on his way out he helps himself to some of Krabs' money, pocketing it as casually as a pirate takes plunder. The old buccaneer robs his own grandson, and approves of him in the same gesture, because to a pirate, high prices and a bit of theft are signs of a Krabs done right. The greed did not come from Betsy, the strict and honest mother, but it clearly runs down the pirate side of the family, from a grandfather who steals from his own blood and respects him more for the size of his prices. Money hunger is the family religion on at least one branch of the tree. There is a nice piece of real-world trivia tucked behind this episode too. The grandfather, Redbeard, was voiced by the actor Dennis Quaid, and the reason Quaid, a major live-action movie star, turned up in a SpongeBob episode is personal rather than corporate. Clancy Brown, the voice of Krabs, had worked with Dennis Quaid on a film called The Express, and it was that existing relationship, one actor bringing in another he had worked with, that landed Quaid the guest role as Krabs' pirate grandfather. So the family connection on screen, grandfather to grandson, is mirrored by a professional connection off-screen, two actors who had shared a set lending their voices to a crab and the crab's grandfather. It is a small thing, but it is the kind of detail that reminds you these episodes are made by people with histories and favors and friendships, and that sometimes the reason a movie star plays a cartoon pirate is simply that he liked the guy already playing the cartoon crab. The pirate past also collides, awkwardly, with the way the newer spin-off material has tried to fill in Krabs' history, and the contradictions there are worth knowing about, because the franchise has quietly rewritten some of its own foundations. The original series was always clear that Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob met as adults, when SpongeBob walked into the Krusty Krab and was hired in the very first episode, Help Wanted. That first meeting is a cornerstone of the show. But the later movie, Sponge on the Run, includes a flashback to a summer camp, Camp Coral, where SpongeBob and Krabs and the others meet as children, which directly contradicts the adult first meeting the pilot established. And the spin-off series Camp Coral muddles it even further, because it is set at that same childhood camp, but it makes Krabs a camp counselor, an authority figure, while the movie had positioned him differently, with Plankton in the camp's kitchen as the chef. The details do not line up between the movie and the series that share the same premise, and neither of them lines up with the original show's insistence that Krabs and SpongeBob were strangers until adulthood. It is the same pattern we keep seeing: new writers, new needs, new backstory, and no particular anxiety about whether it fits what came before. The franchise treats its own history the way Krabs treats a menu promise, technically on the record and not really binding. I want to end this stretch on the single episode that most contradicts the greedy monster he became, because it is important to remember that he did not start out irredeemable. It is a very early episode from the first season called Squeaky Boots, and it is built as a parody of Edgar Allan Poe's story, The Telltale Heart. In it, Krabs cheats SpongeBob, palming off a pair of unwanted boots as a valuable gift and taking SpongeBob's money for them. The boots turn out to squeak maddeningly, and SpongeBob loves them, wears them everywhere, and the constant squeaking drives Krabs slowly out of his mind. But here is the crucial thing, the thing that marks this as a portrait of an earlier, softer Krabs. The reason the squeaking torments him is guilt. Like the murderer in Poe's story, who hears the dead man's heart beating under the floorboards, Krabs hears the squeak of the boots as the sound of his own bad conscience, his shame at having cheated a trusting employee, and it builds and builds until he cannot stand it and confesses. He breaks. His guilt physically overwhelms him and forces the truth out. That is a Mr. Krabs with a working conscience, a man who cheats someone and is then destroyed from the inside by the wrongness of it, and it is almost impossible to square with the later Crab who drives Plankton towards suicide for fun and feels nothing. The wikis and the fans flag Squeaky Boots as an early characterization that the show simply grew out of, and I think that is exactly right. Somewhere between the first season and the seventh, the conscience that could not survive a squeaking boot went quiet, and the greed that used to war with it won the field. Watching Squeaky Boots now is like looking at a photograph of someone before the thing that changed them, and knowing what they became. Some of the most interesting material about Mr. Krabs is not in the episodes at all, but in the pieces of episodes that were cut, changed, or quietly pulled. And this is the layer that even a devoted fan who has seen everything twice will not know from watching, because by definition, it is the stuff that got removed. So let us go through the ghosts, the versions of scenes that existed and then did not. The most famous cut is one people constantly get wrong, and it involves a Krusty Krab security trap. In the episode Just One Bite, there was a sequence, roughly 40 seconds of it, in which Squidward triggers a trap that Mr. Krabs had installed to protect the Krabby Patties. In the scene, Squidward reaches for what he thinks is water, and it turns out to be a bucket of gasoline, and then a flame is introduced, with the obvious violent implication. Starting in early 2002, that sequence was removed from American reruns, and for years the assumption was that it had something to do with the atmosphere after the September 11th attacks, that it was pulled out of some post-tragedy sensitivity. But the person who actually knows, the storyboard director Vincent Waller, has since said plainly that the real reason was much simpler and had nothing to do with any of that. Nickelodeon did not want a scene showing gasoline and a lighter, because it was the kind of thing a child might try to imitate at home. It was cut for straightforward imitation safety, a gas and a flame being a bad thing to put in front of kids, and not as any kind of reaction to world events. The proof that it was a network call rather than a moral panic is that the scene still survives in other countries. It was left intact in the Canadian broadcast and in the South Korean, Hong Kong, Serbian, and Bulgarian versions, so if you know where to look, the trap scene Krabs built to guard his patties still exists, just not on American television. That detail, that Krabs had installed a gasoline trap to protect his food, is worth pausing on, because it fits everything else we know. Of course he booby-trapped the Krusty Krab. Of course the man who guards his formula with his soul would rig the kitchen with a lethal deterrent against theft. The cut scene, however dangerous, is perfectly in character, and its removal means most American viewers never got to see just how far Krabs would go to protect his product, which is to say, as far as arson. There is a much smaller cut from the Christmas episode that is pure distilled greed, and I love it precisely because it is so tiny and so telling. In the special Christmas Who, there was a deleted line where Krabs, listing what he wants, says, "Do not forget about me, pony," a callback to an earlier wish for a pony with saddlebags full of money. Think about that as a Christmas wish. Not a pony, which would be a child's ordinary greedy dream, but a pony that comes with saddlebags full of money, a beast of burden whose entire purpose is to carry cash. It is the most Krabs possible thing to want for Christmas, an animal reimagined as a money delivery system. The line survives only in the storyboard version included on some of the American home video releases, and it is absent from the versions released in the United Kingdom and Australia, so like the gasoline trap, it is a piece of his greed that only exists in certain editions, a deleted flourish of avarice preserved on a DVD. The strangest and most complete piece of cut material attaches to Nasty Patty, and to get there we should quickly recall what that episode is, because it is one of his more chilling greed stories in its own right. In it, Krabs is so enraged at the idea of giving a supposed health inspector a free meal that he and SpongeBob deliberately cook the most disgusting patty they can, loaded with vile ingredients, meaning to sicken the man rather than lose a single free lunch to him. The inspector chokes on a fly, slips, and knocks himself unconscious, and then a radio report reveals the horror, that this was the real health inspector after all, and the rest of the episode is the two of them frantically trying to hide what they believe is a dead body. The entire nightmare is set in motion by Krabs refusing to give away one meal. Now, that episode exists in an early work print, an unfinished version, and it is genuinely different from what aired. The work print has a completely different opening and a completely different ending, and it includes a deleted gag implying that SpongeBob stuffed the disgusting patty down his pants at one point. This raw work print, with its storyboards, its deleted scenes, and its unpolished vocal track, has actually been preserved and archived online, on the Internet Archive, where the curious can find it. So there is a whole alternate cut of one of Krabs' darkest episodes sitting in a digital library, a version of the story that the public was never meant to see in that form, with a different beginning, a different end, and a gag that did not make it. It is the kind of thing that reminds you these episodes were not born whole. They were assembled, reworked, and trimmed, and the discarded drafts do not always disappear. There is one more thing to correct about Nasty Patty, because it connects to a claim people make confidently and wrongly. You will sometimes hear that Nasty Patty was never banned anywhere, that despite its dark premise, it always aired freely. That is not true. The episode was in fact officially pulled in specific markets for being too frightening. It was removed from the Hebrew dub in Israel, and it was pulled from broadcast in South Korea, both times because the content, the fake dead body, the whole macabre hide the corpse plot, was judged too scary for the audience. So an episode driven entirely by Krabs refusing to give away one free meal ended up being too disturbing to air in more than one country, which tells you something about how far his cheapness pushed that story. It is easy to file Nasty Patty under comedy, and it is a comedy, but it is a comedy dark enough that real broadcasters in real countries decided their viewers should not see it. What all of these cut and altered pieces have in common, and the reason I find this layer so rewarding, is that almost every one of them makes Krabs slightly worse, slightly greedier, slightly more dangerous than the aired version lets on. The gasoline trap he built to guard his patties, the Christmas wish for a money-carrying pony, the extra gag in his darkest episode. In each case, the finished, broadcast Mr. Krabs is a little sanded down from the version that first existed, the sharpest edges filed off by a network worried about imitation or fright or good taste. The greed you see on television is already the toned-down cut. The rawer material, the work prints and the deleted lines, and the scenes that only survive in Serbia or on a fan's archived file, shows you a Krab the censors decided was a touch too much. And knowing that changes how you watch the polished version. You are always seeing the safe edit of a character who, in his first drafts, went further. Beyond the scenes that were trimmed, there are whole Krabs episodes that ran into trouble with the network or the outside world, pulled from the air or held back for reasons that range from the reasonable to the strange, and they are worth knowing about, because they mark the boundaries of what even this show was allowed to do with him. The clearest case is Midlife Crustacean, the Season 3 episode we have already touched on for the crab meat line, that moment where Krabs bites into a patty and says, "So that is what I taste like." That line is why fans keep the episode close, but it is not why the episode is famous now. The episode is famous now because it has effectively vanished. Since 2018, Midlife Crustacean has not aired on Nickelodeon, and it was later removed from the major streaming services as well, taken off Paramount's platform and off Amazon's around 2021. The network actually explained why, which they rarely do. A spokesperson named David Bitler said the episode was pulled following a standards review, in which they determined that some story elements were not appropriate for children. The story element in question is the climax. The whole episode follows Krabs having a midlife crisis, trying to feel young again by going out on a wild night with SpongeBob and Patrick, and it ends with the three of them conducting what the episode calls a panty raid, sneaking into a house to steal women's underwear, only for the house to turn out to belong to Krabs' own mother, who catches him and grounds him like a child. It is the raid premise, an adult Krab breaking into a home to steal underwear, that the standards review flagged years after the fact, and so the episode was quietly retired. There is a strange little coda too, because in July of 2023, the episode briefly reappeared on a streaming service, apparently by accident, a glitch that let it slip back into public view for a short window before it was pulled down again. So one of the episodes fans most want to see, partly because of that crab meat line, exists now mostly as a thing that used to be on television, surfacing for a moment through a technical error before disappearing back into the vault. A different kind of withholding happened to a Krusty Krab episode for reasons that had nothing to do with its content being inappropriate and everything to do with the timing of the real world. The episode is called Quarantined Krab, and its plot revolves around a disease outbreak, something the show called the clam flu, that leads to the Krusty Krab being placed under quarantine. Under normal circumstances, that is a perfectly ordinary cartoon premise. But the episode was finished right as the real coronavirus pandemic was reshaping the entire planet, and a storyline about a flu outbreak and a quarantine suddenly felt like something the network did not want to put in front of children in the middle of a genuine global health crisis. So Nickelodeon shelved it over pandemic sensitivities. It was cut from the home video release of that season, the 12th season DVD that came out in early 2021, and it was held back from broadcast until finally airing in the spring of 2022, once the world had moved into a different phase. It is a rare case of an episode being delayed, not because of anything wrong with the episode, but because reality had briefly made its harmless premise feel too close to the bone. A quarantine at the Krusty Krab was just a joke until, for a couple of years, quarantine stopped being a joke for anyone. And then there is the episode that is the source of one of the 5 facts I most wanted to make sure we reached tonight. And it is a genuinely wild piece of television history, because in this one, the cast actually swore. The episode is Sailor Mouth from the 2nd season, and its entire premise is about bad language. SpongeBob learns a curse word without understanding what it is, from writing on the back of the Krusty Krab dumpster, and the episode becomes an escalating comedy about profanity, built around a specific set of 13 forbidden bad words, with the particular one SpongeBob first learns being, in the show's counting, the 11th of them. On screen, every curse is covered by a nautical sound effect, a dolphin squeak, or a boat horn, or some other sea noise, so that you hear a comedic bleep instead of a swear. That much you can watch for yourself. Here is what you cannot watch. According to Tom Kenny, the voice of SpongeBob, the scripted approach was originally going to be the mild, made-up, cartoon-style substitute swearing, the kind of thing where a character says a nonsense word in place of a curse. But that turned out to be very hard for the actors to perform convincingly, to sell fake swearing as real anger. So Nickelodeon made an unusual call. They let the actors say actual profanity, real curse words, in the recording booth, delivered with real force, and then they painted over each genuine swear with those dolphin and sea sound effects in the final mix. Which means the version you hear on television has real, adult, uncensored profanity underneath the cute sea noises, performed for real by the cast and then buried under sound design. The implication of that is delicious, and Tom Kenny has confirmed it. Somewhere, there exists a genuinely uncensored master recording of Sailor Mouth, a version with the sea sounds stripped away and the actual swearing audible, the cast of a children's cartoon cursing up a storm, and Kenny has said, flatly, that the public will never be allowed to hear it, ever. It is locked away, a piece of forbidden audio that will never see the light. There is even a tantalizing loose end, because a former showrunner, Paul Tibbitt, revealed in a fan question and answer session in early 2024 that he once personally owned a VHS copy of that uncensored version, and that he no longer has any idea where it is. So the single most sought-after piece of SpongeBob audio, the real swearing under Sailor Mouth, may exist on a lost videotape that a former showrunner misplaced years ago, out there somewhere, unaccounted for. As lost media legends go, that is a very good one, because it is confirmed to have existed, confirmed to be lost track of, and confirmed to be something the studio will never release. And of course the episode is a Krusty Krab episode. The dumpster with the bad word on it is Krabs' dumpster. The whole thing happens on his property, in his restaurant, and Krabs himself, when he loses his temper later in the episode, unleashes a torrent of the very swearing the episode is built around, which means a good chunk of that forbidden, buried, real profanity is coming out of the mouth of Mr. Krabs. The way that episode traveled around the world is its own small marvel, because different countries had to solve the swearing problem differently. Since the American version relies on covering real curses with sea sounds, dubbing it into other languages meant deciding how to handle 13 bad words that are technically never actually spoken in the clear. Some dubs got creative. In one version, the Kurdish Sorani broadcast, the solution was simply to mute SpongeBob's voice entirely during the moment he counts off the list of Krabs' curses, cutting the audio rather than trying to translate or replace it. So in that version, a child watching sees SpongeBob's mouth move through the forbidden words and hears nothing at all, a hole of silence where the swearing would be. It is a reminder that this cartoon, which seems so simple, is actually a fantastically complicated object once it crosses a border, a thing that has to be resolved from scratch in every language, and that the greedy crab at the center of it has been made to swear and made to fall silent in dozens of tongues, each with its own answer to the problem of a children's show that once let its actors curse for real. Let us pull back from the episodes for a while and look at the world the show is planted in, because Bikini Bottom sits on top of a real place with a heavy history, and the numbers and records that surround the series tell their own story about how enormous this thing became. Start with the ground under everyone's feet. Bikini Bottom is named after and situated beneath the real Bikini Atoll, a ring of coral in the Pacific that is one of the most nuclear-scarred places on Earth. Between 1946 and 1958, the United States conducted 23 nuclear tests at Bikini Atoll, detonating bombs on and around it, including some of the largest the country ever set off, and displacing the people who lived there. That is the real location the show's undersea town is named for. Now, the creators have never made the show a lecture about that, and it stays firmly a comedy, but it is not an accident either. Mr. Lawrence, who voices Plankton and writes for the show, has said in an interview that the crew were consciously aware of the nuclear history and played with the idea, the notion, that these strange, mutated-looking sea creatures, a sponge with a face, a squirrel who lives underwater, a crab who fathered a whale, might be understood as the bizarre products of a nuclear test site. It is a dark seed under a bright show, and once you know it is there, the sheer strangeness of the character designs takes on a faint glow of radiation. The impossible biology, the crab and the whale, the plankton married to a computer, all of it sits over a real place that was bombed 23 times, and the crew knew it. Against that heavy backdrop, the awards the show has won for its Krabs material are a lighter kind of record, but they say something about the craft. We already talked about Clancy Brown's individual Emmy and the Annie Award for writing. There is also a striking run of recognition specifically for sound, and it clusters around the greediest episodes. The episode Wet Painters, the one with the paint bubble threatening the first dollar, won a Golden Reel Award from the industry's sound editors. And it was not alone. Nasty Patty, the dark one with the health inspector, also won a Golden Reel for its sound editing. And Midlife Crustacean, the now vanished Panty Raid episode, won a Golden Reel too, in a music category. 3 different Krabs-centered episodes, honored by professional sound editors for the quality of their craft, which is a reminder that the sonic world of this show, the squelches and the register dings and the sea sounds painted over the swearing, is the work of serious artists at the top of their field. The Greed episodes are not just well-written and well-voiced. They are, on the technical level, among the best-made things the show produced. The raw popularity numbers are almost hard to believe. 2 SpongeBob episodes rank among the most-watched series premieres in the entire history of Nickelodeon, a network that has been making children's television for decades. An episode called Atlantis SquarePants, which premiered in November of 2007, drew something like 8.75 million viewers, placing it 5th on the network's all-time list of premiere audiences. And another, Dunces and Dragons, from February of 2006, pulled in around 8.5 million, landing 6th. These are not ratings for a season finale of a hit adult drama. These are numbers for individual episodes of a cartoon about a sponge, and they put SpongeBob episodes shoulder to shoulder with the biggest things Nickelodeon has ever aired. The restaurant, the crab, the burger, the whole apparatus of Krabs' greed has been watched by tens of millions of people at a time, over and over, for a generation. It is easy to forget, when you are deep in the weeds of a work print or a dub, just how gigantic the audience for all of this actually is. Here is a piece of trivia about how the episodes are ordered that genuinely surprised me, because it undercuts an assumption you might not even realize you hold. You would think the episodes air in the order they were made, but they do not. They air in what is called packaging order, an order decided for broadcast that has little to do with production sequence. The consequences of this are sometimes strange. An episode called Squeaky Boots, the very one we discussed with the Telltale Heart Conscience, was actually the 3rd segment the show ever produced, one of the earliest things they made, and yet it was bumped all the way back in the airing order, held until it came out as a much later installment in the 1st season, so that one of the first things ever animated arrived on screens well after episodes made months afterward. A whole production code in the numbering was simply skipped and never used. Only the very first season aired more or less in the order it was produced, and after that the sequence scrambled. So the neat idea that you can watch the show and see the character develop in the order the writers developed him is an illusion. The early softer Krabs of Squeaky Boots, with his working conscience, may have reached many viewers after they had already met harder versions of him. The development happening out of order, the man arriving at your television shuffled. There is one more artifact worth mentioning, because it exists as a physical object you can hold, and it marks how thoroughly this character has been enshrined. For the show's 25th anniversary, an official art book was produced, a large, serious volume of over 350 pages, collecting the show's concept art, storyboards, and background paintings, the kind of prestige book usually reserved for films and fine art. And in that book, Mr. Krabs gets his own dedicated spread, a pair of facing pages given over entirely to him, showing off early Hillenburg concepts of the character, storyboards, and the painted backgrounds of his world. Think about the distance traveled. A miserly crab, invented as a supporting figure because a whale daughter needed a father, with a greed grafted on by a writer to give him personality, is now the subject of a 2-page spread in a museum-quality art book. His earliest sketches preserved and printed and sold to fans who want to own a piece of how he was made. The joke became an icon, and the icon got an art book. Somewhere in that fact is the whole strange arc of the thing. A rough drawing of a red crab becoming, 25 years later, a page you can frame. All of these numbers and records and real-world anchors point at the same quiet truth, which is that a show this successful is never really just a show. It is a nuclear test site turned into a comedy. It is tens of millions of viewers per premiere. It is award-winning sound design painted over real profanity. It is an art book and a trademark protected by federal courts, and a character voiced in dozens of languages by actors who dedicated decades of their lives to a crab. The greed we have spent all this time examining is fictional, but the machine that produced it, and the world it grew out of, are enormous and very real, and Mr. Krabs, counting his imaginary money, sits at the center of one of the largest entertainment enterprises the medium has ever produced, which is its own kind of fortune, larger than anything he ever managed to hoard on screen.